Chapter 2836. It happened a few days ago. After Miss Chin reunited with Master, she had sex with Mr. Lon again. Anna sounded hesitant. I don't know if it was a coincidence or a deliberate date. As soon as she finished speaking, her body was pushed aside by Lan Yu. Anna's body fell heavily on the ground. Because she used too much strength, a trace of blood flowed from the corner of her mouth. It was bright red. But Anna didn't seem to care. She continued to crawl towards him and said in a low voice, "Master, only Anna is true to you. She didn't love you for a long time. Master, you have to be careful of her. Don't trust her too much. Women can't be trusted." The men of the Rong family never fell in love with any woman. Only her master fell in love with a girl. He changed so much that no one could recognize him. This kind of love was fatal to her master. She had to stop it. Anna's body was kicked away. Rong Lei's eyes flashed coldly as he strode towards the hall. When it came to women like Anna, he had never shown any mercy. Without Anna, there would be many women willing to replace her to warm his bed and be loyal to him. As long as he hooked his finger, these women would lose their souls. Rong Lei's lips curved into a cold smile. Qin Chun drove to a high-end shopping mall in the city center. There were top brands there. When she got out of the car and walked into the elevator, she frowned at herself in the elevator. Would she be treated as a monster if she went to buy women's clothes like this? She imitated the way a woman walked in the elevator. She felt a little awkward, let alone others. But she still wanted to go shopping. She could say that she bought it for her girlfriend and try it on secretly in the changing room. Qin Chun thought this was the best idea. As long as she didn't leave the changing room, no one would see her strange look. When they reached the top floor, they walked into a brand. This brand wasn't gentle, so it was easier for Qin Chun to accept it. She walked closer and seemed to be flipping through it casually. Sure enough, the shop assistant came over to greet him. "Sir, do you want to buy clothes for your girlfriend or wife?" Qin Chun smiled and said calmly, "Give it to my wife." Just as she finished speaking, a voice rang out. "Cousin, you don't know when you got married?" Qin Chun was still holding the women's clothes in his hand. He looked towards the direction of the voice and saw Huang Xia. Then her eyes darkened. What a coincidence. Huang Xia was just hanging out with her colleagues. She didn't expect to meet Qin Chun. The shop assistant at the side was stunned. The gentleman in front of them was a woman? Looking again, it was clearly a man. Although he was very good-looking, there was no femininity at all. How could such a superb man be a woman? After being exposed by Huang Xia, Qin Chun had nothing to hide. He snorted and said, "You did it on purpose. Are you that childish?" Huang Xia sneered, "You went to bed with Lan Yu because you didn't want me to be with him, right? Now he broke up with me. Are you satisfied?" Qin Chun looked at her and said calmly, "He is not suitable for you. I only know that you are a transvestite or a demon." Huang Xia didn't care about her face anymore. She said it in a very nasty way. Qin Chun frowned. "What do you like about Lan Yu?" Actually, until now, Qin Chun didn't know what he liked about Lan Yu. Chapter 2837. Qin Chun was stunned. She liked Lan Yu. She had actually overlooked it. Was it because she had enjoyed his love and care back then that she had taken it for granted? Even when they were separated, she still had a little temper, thinking that he would never forget her. She thought that even if she didn't want him, he wouldn't let her and her cousin be together. But she had never thought about how much she liked Lan Yu to be willing to let go of that pain and be with him. Qin Chun suddenly took 2 steps back, threw the clothes in her hands and walked out quickly. She walked directly to the elevator and went down to the parking lot. Huang Xia was stunned for a moment and quickly followed, but she only had time to see Qin Chun's face disappear into the elevator. Huang Xia had a feeling that Qin Chun had gone to look for Lan Yu. Did she want to go back to Lan Yu's side? Actually, at this moment, Qin Chun didn't think too much about it. She just wanted to look for Lan Yu and see him. Maybe she could say it with her own mouth, or to him, or in her heart, that she liked him. Qin Chun drove the car to Grandview Group. When she was downstairs, the receptionist didn't stop her because they knew each other. After Qin Chun got into the elevator, The receptionist called the CEO's office, but the line was busy. Forget it, the receptionist smiled. Just take it as a surprise for the CEO. In the end, it was a surprise for Qin. Lan Yu's office was pushed open, and there was a low and hoarse panting sound. The sound was from Lan Yu, and under him was a B-list celebrity who looked similar to Qin. At this moment, Lan Yu and she were on the desk, making love, not knowing what the world was. That slender and long leg swayed gently, and it made Qin's heart ache. She looked at the scene in front of her, and her body froze. He didn't even know how to react. She no longer had anything to do with Lan Yu. He was a single man. He could sleep with whomever he wanted and wherever he wanted. As long as he paid, women would throw themselves at him. Even worse, he had good looks and was good in bed. Even if women threw themselves at him, he wouldn't lack women. What was she now? Qin's face was a little numb, hot, and cold. She wiped her face with her hand and realized that she was crying. She cried again. She cried twice for the same man. Did she like him, or did she fall in love? She smiled, squeezing out a smile that was uglier than crying. Sorry to bother you. Then she quickly walked out. Only now did she know how some women felt when they caught their husbands and boyfriends cheating on them. She had always been high up, she had always looked down on everyone, and looked at the world from the perspective of God. It turned out that one day, she would also fall into the dust in such a humble manner. It turned out that loving and liking someone was really not good at all. Qin walked quickly, and she also lost her composure. In the office, Lan Yu's body suddenly froze. Then, he pinched the chin of the woman under him so hard that he almost crushed her. How dare you drug me? His voice was cold, and he was completely sober. He threw her away, tidied himself, and pressed the intercom. Come and get rid of this woman. Don't let her have a chance to keep my seed. He was drugged, but it was also true that he had sex with this woman. It was even more true that Qin saw it. Lan Yu sat there, his face as dark as water. He told himself that he shouldn't chase after her, because she had already made her choice. But Chapter 28:38. Qin went down to the first floor. Just as he was about to open the car door, Lan Yu caught up with him. He held her hand and his face was still a little pale. Qin looked down. There's nothing else to say. She looked up at him and said, Lan Yu, what else do you think can be explained? She murmured, there's nothing else to explain. We're not together in the first place. He still didn't let her go. He frowned and looked at her. Why are you here? Qin looked up. His eyes were slightly red and even a little bloodshot. She said softly, I came to tell you that I'm going back to New York. Yes, I'm going back to New York. She smiled bitterly. Maybe I won't come back again. Lan Yu frowned. Really? Yes. Qin clenched his fingers. Now, Mr. Lan Yu, can you let go of me? His fingers loosened, and at the same time, he said somewhat dispiritedly, it's not what you see. Qin didn't reply because it was meaningless. She hurt him and he hurt her. Whether it was true or not between them, and whether it was true or not between him and someone else was important, but he couldn't say it out loud. Let go. Qin's voice was low. Lan Yu looked at her and didn't let go. Instead, he grabbed her hand. The next moment, her body was pressed against the car. He narrowed his eyes. Qin, you clearly like me. Why did you push me out to be with that zombie? Huh? He pressed her shoulder and his eyes were filled with anger. You want to go with him, go to New York with him, marry him, and have children with him. But do you know him? Do you know his past all these years? He said word by word, you're as stupid as a pig. With that, he kissed her lips angrily. Qin was stunned. What did he say? He said that she was as stupid as a pig. He said that she liked him. Yes, she liked him. But how could she say it now? Qin was proud. He would never admit that she liked him after he had slept with another woman. That would be too cheap. Besides, she really didn't know her future, so there was no need to say it. Tears rolled down from the corner of her eyes. It ate at her heart and scalded his. Qin, Lan Yu whispered while kissing her. I was drugged. I haven't touched anyone. Just today, he didn't want her to believe him, but he had to tell her. Her crying made his heart ache, but more than that, he felt a glimmer of hope. She cared about him, or else she wouldn't have cried. Qin Chun listened absent-mindedly. He looked into his eyes and then suddenly pushed him away. She didn't want to listen to this anymore, because she would be shaken. She was not bound to him and other women once in a relationship, when they were not together. She finally understood that she liked him. That feeling of liking him was like a violent storm that she was powerless to resist. But she had to push him away. Pushing him away, she stepped back step by step. There was a hint of determination on her face. Lan Yu, it's impossible between us. She said that it was impossible, not that she didn't like him. There was a faint smile in her eyes. Lan Yu, take this as my confession to you. Retreating slowly, he moved forward step by step. Chapter 28:39. Chun Chun. Lan Yu's voice was a little hoarse, and at the same time, he had already rushed towards her. He couldn't let anything happen to her. He couldn't let her get hurt. Even if he was hit and turned into a vegetable, it didn't matter. Lan Yu was ready to sacrifice himself. But someone was faster than him. It was Huang Xia. She rushed out from the side, stood in front of Qin Chun, and at the same time, pushed Lan Yu away. Everything happened in the blink of an eye, however. There were some things that could be calculated wrongly. For example, Huang Xia originally wanted to just suffer a minor injury, but she lost control of the stalled car. In this calculation, she lost one of her legs. In the hospital, in a world of purity and whiteness, Huang Xia lay quietly, without a trace of blood on her face. The chief surgeon for her was Qin Chun. Qin Chun wore a mask, and only a pair of eyes were exposed. Huang Xia was undergoing local surgery, and her mind was still clear. Her eyes were wide open, and she felt that a part of her body was about to lose. Her pupils suddenly shrank, and she quietly looked at Qin Chun. Qin Chun's eyes were clear. She gently leaned over and whispered, Xia, I'm going to start. In this car accident, one of Huang Xia's legs was going to be sawed off. It was going to be sawed off, and this leg below the knee would be empty in the future. After Qin Chun finished speaking, Huang Xia closed her eyes, and a tear slid down from the corner of her eye. Qin Chun's hand clenched. She had been the chief surgeon for countless people, but this was the first time she had personally sawed off a loved one's leg. But she had to do it. Just as she was preparing for the surgery, Huang Xia's voice was very soft. Sawing off my leg, you must have a perverted satisfaction in your heart, don't you? Qin Chun glanced at her, and then looked at the assistant nurse. The nurse said softly, the effect of anesthesia has been achieved. Dr. Qin? Qin Chun nodded. She was a highly professional doctor, so she wouldn't be distracted by Huang Xia's words. When she picked up the surgical saw and cut open the broken bone and half of the leg, blood spurted out and splashed all over her face. The smell of blood and Huang Xia's cries could be heard everywhere. At that time, with just a glance, Qin Chun knew that Huang Xia had dug a grave for herself. That leg was also buried by Huang Xia herself. She already had one leg missing. There were some things that Qin Chun wouldn't fuss about with her, and he couldn't afford to. In the sky full of blood, Huang Xia's broken leg was cut off. In the clean and white ward, Qin Chun stood and leaned against the wall. He was still wearing a surgical gown, and there were spots of blood on it. Lan Yu stood beside her, and no one said a word. When Huang Xia woke up, it was already 10 hours later. Night fell, and behind the light was endless darkness, as if a little devil would come to the world at any time. Huang Xia's parents came and stayed by the bed, especially her mother, who had been crying softly. When she woke up, she immediately grabbed her hand. Xia. As she said that, she cried again. Why are you so stupid? Why did you want to save such a man? Qin Chun and Lan Yu's bodies were stiff, but no one responded. Huang Xia's eyes quietly fell on the ceiling, and her voice was very soft. Mom, it hurts. Let me be alone for a while, okay? Chapter 28:40. She didn't feel anything, but she knew that she had lost one of her legs. It was gone. Her mother said that she lost it because of Lan Yu. She did lose it because of Lan Yu. If she didn't want people to hit Qin Chun, if she didn't want them to owe her, she wouldn't have blocked it. But she didn't know that she would lose a leg. Huang Xia's tears rolled down from the corners of her eyes. She cried out, "Get out, I don't want to see you." Her mother was stunned, then turned to look at Qin Shan and Lan Yu. "Get out. Didn't you hear Xia say that she doesn't want to see you?" After she shouted, she suddenly changed her words. "Lan Yu, you should take responsibility for Xia's current situation." Lan Yu said coldly, "How can I take responsibility? Xia is like this because of you. How can she face life with one leg in the future? You must marry her," Mother Huang said confidently. Lan Yu glanced at Qin Chun and his lips curled into a cold smile. How ridiculous. Huang Xia bumped into him and he had to spend the rest of his life. He was now disgusted with that unfortunate woman. He was about to speak, but Huang Xia said softly, "Mom, I want to talk to Qin Chun." Mother Huang thought that her daughter was stupid, so she immediately said, "Are you stupid, daughter? Qin Chun can't marry you. You have to let Lan Yu take responsibility now." Huang Xia didn't say anything again. She just looked at Qin Chun. "You all go out. I'll talk to her," Qin Chun said lightly. Mother Huang wanted to refuse, but Qin Chun was born with a sense of superiority. Mother Huang couldn't hold on for long and went out, including Lan Yu. The ward was quiet. Huang Xia blinked, and a string of tears slipped down her cheeks. Her voice was hoarse and unwilling. "You know, don't you? Know what?" Qin Chun sat on the edge of the bed and asked calmly. Huang Xia turned her head and stared at Qin Chun. "Yes, I asked someone to drive a car over." She squeezed out a sinister smile. "I just didn't expect that I would lose a leg." "Qin Chun, you must be happy now, aren't you?" Qin Chun looked at her somewhat crazy face and smiled softly. "What's there to be happy about? Tell me." Huang Xia stared blankly for a moment before saying, "No one is fighting with you over Lan Yu anymore, right?" Qin Chen's gaze fell on Huang Xia's face. After looking at her for a long time, he sighed softly. "Xia, is it worth it? Is it worth it to do this for a man? You weren't like this before." After she finished speaking, Huang Xia turned her face away in discomfort. At this moment, she was especially embarrassed, because she wanted to play tricks, but in the end, she lost one of her legs. Qin Chun stood up slowly. "Lan Yu and I have already separated. Xia, if you think this man will love you, then I will convince him." She looked at Huang Xia's leg, and her heart was as empty as the leg. She knew what she was going to face. She was going to face Lan Yu's anger. They all knew what Huang Xia had done, but she still asked him to marry her. If Lan Yu hadn't given Xia a chance from the beginning, Xia wouldn't have taken this step. Perhaps such a fierce love could hold Lan Yu's heart. As long as Lan Yu had something to worry about, he would stay away from her. Qin Chen looked down. She was selfish after all. She still thought about Lan Yu. Chapter 28:41. When he said this, Huang Xia was stunned. With tears streaming down her face, she looked at Qin Chun in disbelief. "I don't believe it." Qin Chun didn't say anything. He just looked at her and smiled faintly. "You could have had a complete life, but you destroyed it yourself." When she walked out and mentioned it to Lan Yu, she knew how cruel she was. For the sake of Lan Yu, she could sacrifice Xia, who only had one leg left. After she finished speaking, Lan Yu leaned against the wall outside the ward and said coldly, "Qin Chun, say it again." Qin Chun stared into his eyes and repeated, "Marry her." Lan Yu took out a cigarette. The cigarette was a little wrinkled. He smoothed it out and then lit it. After taking a deep puff, he looked at her and said, "Why?" Qin Chen's eyes were a little straight. She looked at him smoking. He looked calm, but in fact, he probably wanted to strangle her. After a long time, she said, "No matter what, she lost a leg. What about me? How will Dr. Qin compensate me for what I lost?" Lan Yu's voice couldn't bear it anymore. "From the moment I became a vegetable, Dr. Qin seemed to be playing with my feelings, until your sweetheart, Rong Lei, appeared. Okay, I can fulfill your wish, but don't you know how Huang Xia's leg was broken? As he spoke, he was really angry. He stepped forward and strangled her neck. Dr. Qin, you are so smart. Can't you see through Huang Xia's little tricks? I can see it. Qin Chun looked at the handsome face close to him and said calmly, but she loves you. Love? Lan Yu smiled bitterly. In Dr. Qin's dictionary, there's also the word love? I'm surprised. He clenched his fingers gently. I really want to dig out your heart and see with my own eyes what your heart is made of. His hand suddenly let go of her. I won't marry her. What if I beg you or threaten you? Qin Chun looked at him and smiled. What if I compensate her with a leg? As soon as she finished speaking, she was slapped on the face. It was a real solid slap. He did not have the slightest bit of tenderness for the fairer sex, nor did he show the slightest bit of mercy. He slapped her with all his strength. Qin Chen's face was slapped to the side, and his cheek instantly swelled up. Lan Yu's palm was a little numb and painful, which showed how much pain she was in. After he got together with her, he doted on her like a prince or a princess. Even when she chose Rong Lei, he didn't touch her at all. But what was she saying now? She used her leg to threaten him to marry Huang Xia. Was she crazy? His eyes stared fixedly at her. There was disappointment and a trace of hatred in them. That hatred was so obvious because he had been let down. Lan Yu looked at her little face and suddenly smiled. It was a smile that made people's hair stand on end. He said, Chen Chen, tell me that you are joking. Your brain is muddled. What you said isn't true. She didn't say anything and continued to look at him. Speak. His voice grew louder, almost as if his heart was being torn apart. Not far away, there were already many people watching. However, he didn't care about losing face because he was so angry that he wanted to kill her. Chapter 28:42. She knew that her answer this time would directly determine their fates. She closed her eyes and nodded gently. Yes. Lan Yu stared at her, and then her whole body was nailed to the wall. Qin Chun, do you feel pain? His gaze was very cold as he stared into her eyes, staring straight at her. Qin Chun closed her eyes slightly. I am a human, so of course I feel pain. No. Lan Yu smiled gently. You are a genius doctor, but the humanity that you should have has been taken away. His hand gently stroked the swollen side of her face. You are so great, so you think that someone will be grateful to you, right? Or do you think that I will be happy, or that Huang Xia will be happy? He pinched her cheek with all his strength, not caring if she would feel pain or not. He said in a hoarse voice, even if I marry her, I won't touch her. I have no interest in her in the first place. Qin Chun, do you think that I will be interested in making love with her? Qin Chun closed her eyes slightly and didn't say anything. He stared at her eyes for a long time and finally laughed in a low voice. Because she is your cousin, because she has a broken leg, you pity her, right? So I should be responsible for the rest of her life, right? Qin Chun opened her eyes and looked at him. Tell me, right? His fingers pinched her cheek so hard that it hurt, and there were obvious bruises. Lan Yu. Her voice was weak, and she couldn't say anything more. He looked at her, and his tone softened a little. He said in a low voice, you don't want to be like this either, right? She was extremely fragile, and her body was exhausted. What hurt the most was her heart. For a moment, she almost regretted it. She wanted to hug him, wanted to rely on him. She wanted to tell him the truth. She wanted to tell him that she actually didn't like Rong Lei at all. Rong Lei was just a dream in the past, and he was the real one. Her lips moved, and the words were on the tip of her tongue. But she hesitated. Qin Chen never hesitated for anything, but she really hesitated today. She needed to think. Thus, he said with difficulty, let me think about it. Lan Yu's expression softened a lot. He reached out and gently caressed her cheek. He said softly, okay, I'll give you time. Qin Chen raised his head and looked at him, not saying anything more. Lan Yu looked at her face and felt guilty. He had hit her too hard just now, but he didn't regret it. If he hadn't hit her like that, she probably wouldn't have woken up. Finally, he brought her to her office. Qin Chen's mental state had not been very good. She sat on the sofa, and Lan Yu found some ointment for her. The green ointment was applied to her face, and it felt much better. However, it was still swollen. This was the first time she had been beaten, but she didn't blame him. Qin Chun closed his eyes and said tiredly, "Lan Yu, I want to rest." He didn't leave. Instead, he covered her with a blanket and said softly, "I'll be by your side. You sleep well." Qin Chun wanted to say something, but he stopped her. "I didn't agree. What you say doesn't count." Qin Chun looked at his face and suddenly turned her head to his side. She didn't say anything, and just placed her face in his arms. She said in a low voice, "Lan Yu, don't say anything. Let me hug you for a while." Chapter 28:43. He stroked her short hair and murmured, "Those women were trying to piss you off. Today was an accident. Chun-Chin, I'm sorry. It won't happen again." Qin Chun shook her head and buried her face in his chest. Her eyebrows were full of worry. She whispered, "If we were really together before Rong Lei appeared, that would be great." She looked up at him. "Lan Yu, have you ever thought of asking me to save your marriage?" His gaze was indifferent and gentle. "I thought about it, but I also thought that you wouldn't agree, so I never dared to do it." Qin Chen's gaze was a little straight, and then he said slowly, "Do you have a ring now? And a wedding dress?" "Lan Yu, I suddenly want to try it. I haven't worn women's clothes for a long time, and I suddenly want to try it." His fingers stroked the swelling on her face. After applying medicine, it had gone down a lot. However, she was still tired. Although he wanted to, he still coaxed her, "Let's go tomorrow. Okay? Chin-Chin, I'll take you to try it tomorrow morning." Qin Chun propped up her body and put her hand on his shoulder. "I want to try it now. Lan Yu, I met Huang Xia in a women's clothing store." Although she didn't say everything, he had already guessed what she wanted to say. He was happy in his heart, not because she wanted to be a woman, but because she seemed to want to be his woman. His throat seemed to be blocked. He wanted to speak, but he couldn't. He just kept looking at her. Qin Chun hugged his neck. "Lan Yu, take me there. Okay? I also want to take photos. I don't think we've taken photos together." Her voice was incredibly soft, which was something he had never heard before. His heart softened. No matter how late it was, he asked his secretary to contact a high-end wedding dress customization center. He had prepared the wedding ring a long time ago, but he had never dared to show it to her. He drove and took her to his villa. He carefully took the ring from the bedside table, knelt on one knee, and put it on for her. Then he kissed her finger. Qin Chun, who was wearing a black shirt, looked down at him from above. Then, she knelt down and kissed his Adam's apple. Lan Yu was stunned. Her thin lips slowly moved to his lips, and her voice is low. "I want to do it with you. Lan Yu, don't refuse." Both of them had gone through a series of unforeseen events, and their stamina was actually quite weak. However, the moment their bodies touched, they still burned like wildfire. She called out his name over and over again in the midst of her sexy panting. The night had turned cold. When she woke up, it was already 1:00 in the morning. Wearing only his ring, she leaned against his chest and asked softly, "Are we still going?" "Go." Lan Yu smiled faintly. "As long as you want to go, I will accompany you." She propped herself up and smiled. An hour later, Qin Chun stood in front of the full-length mirror in a white, custom-made wedding dress. Her short hair was combed back, and there was a white veil on her head, which was just enough to cover up her short hair. Her delicate face, which was usually too good-looking, became even more three-dimensional with makeup, especially her lips, which were bright red. Qin Chun had a beautiful figure, so the exposed thin shoulders gave people the most room for imagination. Chapter 28:44. Lan Yu also changed into a suit and slowly walked to her side. He lowered his head, hugged her from behind, and kissed her neck. "You're so beautiful." Not because he loved her, but because she was really beautiful. In the past, he had imagined her in women's clothing countless times in his mind, but she still broke through his imagination. She was so beautiful that she took his breath away and fascinated him. Chin Chun looked at himself in the mirror and gently stroked his head. She chuckled. "You're also very handsome." He continued to kiss her shoulder. He couldn't believe that God was so kind to him, to give her to him. This was her choice, but he actually didn't have the courage to ask. He was afraid that if he asked, it would just be a dream. Chin Chun let him kiss her. She felt warm and wet on her neck. That was Lan Yu, crying? She didn't dare to ask, so she said very softly, "Let's take a photo." "Okay?" Lan Yu buried his head for a long time before he raised it. He said, "Okay." The photographer was also one of the best in B City. He was originally angry when he was dug out in the middle of the night, but when he saw Chin Chun, he lost all his temper. He only took one photo, because the man was handsome and the woman was beautiful. One photo was enough. The photographer felt that this was the pinnacle of his photography career, so he put away his camera and left. Chin Chun turned his head and looked at Lan Yu. "Where are we going?" He looked at her and suddenly reached out his hand. "I'll take you to a place." Chin Chun pursed his lips and clasped his fingers tightly with hers. Tonight, she would follow him wherever he went. This was the first time she had fallen in love. She finally fell in love with Lan Yu. When they walked out of the photo studio, there was actually a gorgeous carriage outside. She looked at him in surprise. Lan Yu went forward and took the saddle from a young man. He turned back and smiled at her. "Mrs. Lan, would you like to go on a night trip with me?" He called her Mrs. Lan. He couldn't take his eyes off her beautiful face tonight. He loved her, probably from a very early age, not because she was a beautiful woman, but even when she was a man, he loved her. Even now, he was unable to extricate himself. It would not be an exaggeration to say that she was poisonous. He looked at her quietly. Chin Chun walked forward slowly and held his hand as they boarded the carriage. She did not deny the way he addressed her, but followed him. At this moment, she had truly cast aside everything. Her parents, her family, and saving the world, they had all been cast aside. All she wanted was to be with him. At this moment, Chin Chun realized how happy people could be when they were selfish. She had restrained herself for too long. From the age of 12, she had turned herself into a living dead person. But at this moment, she wanted to be herself again. She sat in the carriage and the night wind blew the white veil on her head. She hugged Lan Yu and shouted, "I like Lan Yu." The night wind was strong, but the eyes of the man who was confessed to were red. He did not say anything, but hugged her tightly and kissed her red lips. From then on, they would be together and would never be separated. Today was the day of their wedding. She kept murmuring, "Lan Yu, I like you." Every word she said was engraved into his bones and blood, and could never be pulled out, however. In those words of love, a tall and handsome man stood at the top. Chapter 28:45. The screen shattered into pieces, and the image on it was also shattered into pieces. That was his Chin Chun, kissing another man and saying that she liked him. She finally fell in love with someone else. Rong Lei smiled coldly and raised his hand. Anna appeared silently. She knelt in front of Rong Lei and unbuttoned his clothes like a loyal maid. She began to please and serve him. She was his loyal slave. She knew that her master was in a bad mood and that he needed the comfort of a woman. Just as Anna was trying her best to please him, Rong Lei stood there with a cold expression. The pleasure of his body did not make him feel better at all. Instead, it made him even more irritated. He lowered his head and looked at the beautiful woman. He pinched her cheeks and forced her to let go of him. He lifted Anna up with one hand and raised her to his level. His voice was extremely gloomy. "Will you betray me?" Anna looked at him in pain. Her eyes were wide open, and there was a hint of embarrassment in the corner of her mouth. She swallowed hard and said in a broken voice, "Master, I won't, I'll never." Rong Lei narrowed his eyes and looked at her beautiful face. It was slightly distorted because of his pleasuring just now. Later, he threw her down and made her lie on the ground. He didn't say anything, but Anna knew very well that her master needed her at this time. She lay on the ground and crawled over like a water snake. She climbed up the man's leg and crawled over bit by bit. She was very good at serving people. Just kneeling like this was enough to satisfy a man. However, a man in a rage was not satisfied with such service. She was thrown onto the sofa and then his tall body covered her. Anna felt a tearing feeling. That night, she realized that her master was like a demon when he went crazy. The night deepened. Ronglei got up and tidied up his clothes. He only buttoned up his shirt and fastened his belt. He still looked elegant. On the other hand, Anna was lying on the sofa. Her back, neck, and entire body were covered in bite marks, like bloody holes. It was a shocking sight. There was also a large pool of blood under her body. At this moment it was still flowing. However, she still hummed excitedly and propped herself up. She prostrated herself at Ronglei's feet and said softly, "Master, Anna will always be loyal to Master." Ronglei's gaze was a little deep. He looked down at the woman beneath his feet as if he was looking at a lowly creature. He kicked her away and walked out. Anna, on the other hand, was still twisting like a snake, extremely excited. At the door, Ronglei's face was gloomy. How could he be tempted by such a lowly woman? All his emotions were firmly sealed in Qin Chen's laughter in the Sea of Flowers 12 years ago. At that time, his Chun was so pure and innocent, and he was the only one in her eyes. But now, she actually fell in love with a lowly life form. It was not a big deal to have a physical relationship, but she fell in love with that person. Now, was she going to be with that person and abandon him? Ronglei smiled coldly and murmured, "Chen Chun, you're so disobedient. What should I do to you?" He raised his head. "I will make you come back to me obediently, and you won't go anywhere in the future." Lan Yu drove the carriage with her and spoiled her like a princess. Chapter 2846. In Lan Yu's villa, in the bedroom with the stars, they made love again and again. Felt like the last time, but also like the first time. It was until dawn when he let go of her. Qin Chun was still wearing the wedding gown, but it had been pulled down to her waist. Lying there, she looked so beautiful. When everything calmed down, Lan Yu kissed her on the head and asked with a hoarse voice, "Have you decided?" Qin Chun rested her face in his arms and replied, However, she looked a little dazed. Could she really be so selfish? She wrapped her slender arms around Lan Yu's neck and buried herself deep in his arms. They were obviously tired, but they did not want to sleep. After lying there for a while, he made love to her again. They did it repeatedly and stayed in bed for the whole day. At 7 o'clock, Lan Yu got up to get something to eat. Qin Chen leaned against the headboard. She didn't do anything. She just lay there quietly. She could smell the scent of Lan Yu. It was so real. She did not think of Ronglei at all. It seemed that Ronglei's place in her heart was slowly being pushed out as she got together with Lan Yu. The phone beside her rang. It was Lan Yu's phone. She took it and looked at it. There was no name on it. She picked it up. The voice on the other side was very coquettish. The first person who spoke was CEO Lan. Qin Chun hung up the phone quietly. She knew that it was one of his confidants from the past. She put on one of his shirts and walked downstairs. Lan Yu was handling the ingredients. He looked at her sideways. "Why are you down?" Qin Chun waved the phone. "Your little cutie is looking for you." Lan Yu did not even look at it. "Put her on the blacklist for me." Qin Chun sat on the counter at the side. She was tall, so it didn't take long for her to climb up. She looked at him and smiled. "What if she's pregnant with your child? That's not good. There will be no children." Lan Yu frowned. After thinking for a while, he walked over and kissed her. "Except for what you saw, there was no one else." Qin Chun grunted and looked at him. "Can you teach me how to make curry rice?" She only knows how to eat, never how to cook. Now that she was watching him cook, she actually wanted to learn. She didn't seem to have made anything for him to eat. Other than making coffee, she didn't know how to do anything. Lan Yu's gaze fell on her face and he smiled. "Okay, come here and I'll teach you." Qin Chun jumped down, but the moment he landed, he frowned. Lan Yu chuckled and placed her in front of him. As he processed the ingredients, he slowly explained the main points to her while kissing her and touching her. Qin Chun tilted his head. Teach him well. There was a tinge of tenderness in her voice. Lan Yu's breathing was a little stagnant. Then he turned her face and kissed her deeply. Qin Chun was stunned for a moment. She reached out and wrapped her arms around his neck. She said in a low voice, "Lan Yu, I'm hungry. I'm hungry too." He nibbled on the corner of her mouth and hinted at it with his body. Qin Chun bit her lip. "But I'm really hungry. Cook again before you eat." He coaxed her and carried her back to the counter. Qin Chun bit her lip. He had already kissed her. She turned her head and put it on his shoulder. She bit him hard. "Beast." "Yes, I'm a beast." He chuckled and hugged her. Chapter 28:47. Qin Chun hugged his body and harumphed. "Hurry up." Lan Yu lowered his head and bit her lips. "Chun Chun, you want me too? Don't you?" She raised her head and looked at him. "Don't say any more." She was a little domineering as she hugged him. As for Lan Yu, he was extremely happy. After a round, he was covered in hot sweat. After cleaning her up, he carried her over and taught her how to make curry rice. Because of their previous intimacy, the dishes he made were all sweet. When it was out of the pot, Qin Chun wanted to take it to eat, but he held her body down. His voice was low and husky. "Chun Chun, tell me, who do you like the most in your heart?" His tone was almost humble. He didn't ask her to completely forget about Rong Lei right now, but he wanted her to have him in her heart. At the very least, she liked him. Qin Chun raised her head and looked at Lan Yu. She was silent for a long time, and his face slowly sank. His fingers pressed on her shoulder and he asked softly, "It's not just another game, is it?" He said bitterly, "Chun Chun, I can't afford to play games anymore. I want to settle down, not just find a random woman, but settle down with you. These days, I haven't been happy apart from you. I don't like any of those women." He shook his head. "I wanted to use them to anger you, but seeing you and Rong Lei together, I'm the one who's angry." When Qin Chun heard that, she felt a little sad. She pursed her lips and said slowly, "Lan Yu, it's not like that." She finally opened up to him. "Rong Lei and I grew up together, and we had the best time." Her face was warm from the memories, and her voice became softer. "He was 8 years older than me. When I was 12, he left because of his health. I never thought he was still alive." Qin Chen's fingers gently caressed Lan Yu's face. "For the first 24 years, I did live for him. I lost myself. Until he appeared, I thought I would always be like this. I became another him, and it was only natural. Perhaps subconsciously, I lived for him. I've never considered the possibility that he's still alive. He's not who I thought he was." Qin Chen smiled and said, "He is not the kind of person I like anymore. Now that I think about it, the old Rong Lei is like a dream, because it was too perfect to be real." Lan Yu heard this and sighed slightly. He held her in his arms and said hoarsely, "Then what do you like about me? Chun Chun, tell me, I want to hear it." In his arms, Qin Chun smelled the faint smell of tobacco on his body. After a while, she said in a low voice, "I don't know either. You're so stupid, not smart, and even a vegetable back then. But such imperfections are very real." Lan Yu laughed softly. "I'm not as bad as you say. I'm not stupid. If you're not stupid, why would you like me?" Qin Chun laid on his shoulder and buried herself in his neck. It was soft like never before. Lan Yu patted her and smiled faintly. "Yeah, now that you mention it, I'm quite stupid." "Lan Yu," she bit him. "You bastard." He just laughed softly and hugged her, feeling especially intimate. Chapter 28:48. He laughed hoarsely. "It won't happen again, I promise." Then, he held her little face and asked softly, "What about you and Rong Lei?" Now that they had reconciled, the man's deep-rooted bad habits came out again. He was clearly out of line, but he was still very cold and worried about her and Rong Lei. However, he didn't dare to be too forceful, because this was Qin Chun, not other women. Qin Chun said honestly, "I kissed." He stared at her. "Kissed? Is it strange? You have done it with others." Qin Chun stretched out his finger and pointed at his heart. You used to have at least 3 or 4 women, right? I have only kissed one woman with Rong Lei. Do you still want to settle the score with me now? Lan Yu smiled bitterly. How dare I? However, what he didn't say was that those women were insignificant. But Rong De was the one she had always liked, which was different. He didn't say it, but brought the curry rice to her and watched her eat. Qin Chen looked at him. Aren't you eating? When you were asleep, I made a bowl of noodles and ate it. He smoked a cigarette and said indifferently. Qin Chen nodded and quickly finished the plate of rice, almost licking it clean. He knew that she could eat a lot, but he was still not used to her being so thin that a big plate of rice was not enough. Qin Chen said pitifully, "Give me another bowl of noodles, just the same as you." Lan Yu looked at her for a long time, shook his head, put the cigarette on his lips, and walked over to help her eat. Qin Chen held his chin. Lan Yu, it's not hygienic for you to smoke and eat at the same time. We just had sex. Why don't you say it's not hygienic? He took the cigarette down and glanced at her. Also, you said that I was so real. Dr. Qin, have you forgotten so quickly? Qin Chen didn't say anything. He was shameless. However, she seemed to like his shamelessness very much. Her heart was bubbling because she liked it. When he was concentrating on his lower body, she ran over and hugged him from behind, moving her head closer to mess with him. Are you done yet? Lan Yu looked at her speechlessly. Do you want me to carry you there again? I still choose to eat noodles. Qin Chen rubbed his belly and smiled at him, but he still hugged him from behind and pressed his face against his back. Lan Yu inadvertently looked up and saw her like this through the glass. At this moment, she didn't seem like a man at all, but a little woman immersed in love. Her whole body was bubbling with happiness, and this happiness was given to her by him. Lan Yu smiled faintly and didn't say anything. He quietly went down to feel her happiness, and his own happiness. When the noodles were ready, he said softly, Chen Chen, the noodles are ready. Qin Chen hugged him a little shamelessly. But I want to hug you now. She was acting coquettishly. She wasn't like this in the past, but now she was like a child in front of him. She was acting shamelessly, but it was extremely cute. Lan Yu looked at himself reflected in the glass, and his eyes were gentle. His voice became softer. Aren't you hungry? I want to hug you more. Her fingers even tightened a little, domineeringly not letting him move. Lan Yu lowered his head and looked at her thin and beautiful fingers. These hands had saved many people, and they had saved him before. Chapter 28:49. He asked hoarsely, Chen Chen, do you love me? These 3 words were very ordinary, but he wanted to hear them. He wanted to hear them desperately. This happiness was too surreal. He was actually afraid and uneasy. He didn't know what she was thinking, so he wanted her to say it personally. He wouldn't get tired of her saying it for an entire night. Qin Chen smiled. You want to hear it? He replied, his voice even gentler than the night sky. Qin Chen smiled and let go of him. She picked up her bowl of noodles. But, I want to eat noodles now, so I don't want to say it. Lan Yu was stunned, then pinched her face. I really want to kill you. Me too, Mr. Lan. She held the bowl and ate the noodles, not at all reserved. It was as if she was starving. He then remembered that she hadn't eaten for almost 24 hours. These 2 bowls might not be enough. He felt a little guilty, so he made her another bowl of chicken noodles and waited patiently for her to finish. Qin Chen ate while looking at the steam rising from the noodle soup. Then, she felt a little touched. Be it now or in the past, Rong Lei had never made anything for her to eat. He didn't need it at all because of his noble status. He could have anything he wanted to eat. Living with him was probably like a princess and a prince. When they grew up, they would be like a king and queen. But those weren't as real as these 2 bowls of noodles. They weren't as happy as these 2 bowls of noodles. Qin Chen looked up at Lan Yu and said softly, I don't know why I like you, but when I'm with you, I'm very happy. There was no need to talk about love. They were happy together, so they should be together. Lan Yu wanted to smoke, but after hearing her words, he put the cigarette back and ruffled her hair. I got it. She started eating again. Then, she seemed to have thought of something. Oh right, Lan Yu, do you have time to go to the mall with me to pick out some women's clothing? I still want to keep my hair long, but before that I can buy a wig first. Otherwise, I'll look really weird. Lan Yu's heart was wet and warm. He said in a hoarse voice, everything's fine. I will also work hard to make your mother like me. Qin Chun smiled at him. The way she smiled was very beautiful. It was the feminine kind of good-looking, not the handsome young man he used to be. Lan Yu smiled. Is this an extra benefit? She said vaguely, yes, because it will make you happy. She finished the noodles, walked over, hugged his shoulder, and put her face close to his. Lan Yu, as long as it makes you happy, I will try to do it. This time, it's my turn to please you. Are you atoning for your sins? He patted her hand. Chunchin, as long as you're happy, you don't have to change too much for me. I like it this way too. She blinked. But I want to change. Not for you, but for my own happiness. He was speechless. Then, he thought of something and said hesitantly, Chunchin, if one day I miss you as a man, can you wear a shirt again and cut your hair short for me to see? He coughed gently. Actually, I'm quite used to it. You know what I mean, right? Qin Chun glared at him for a long time before spitting out. Lan Yu, you're shameless. His meaning couldn't be more obvious. He liked to be with men. And do it. Just thinking about it, he was extremely perverted. Chapter 2850. Qin Chun pulled up his shirt a little. I'm a woman. I've always been one. Well, it's not obvious. I have to confirm it again. He deliberately laughed at her. Qin Chun glared at him. Lan Yu finally let her go and smiled. I lied to you. He pulled her into his arms and whispered, You're the most beautiful woman I've ever seen. With their foreheads touching, she suddenly became a little coquettish and snorted. The women in your office are very plump. So you mean that you're still angry? He kissed her lips with a seductive intention. So you're going to ignore me? Don't you want to have sex with me? She snorted. He smiled hoarsely against her lips. I'm afraid that you can't help it, Qin Chun reached out and patted his face gently. Do you think everyone is as lustful as you? At least you are. He had already reached out to hold her and walked straight upstairs. Qin Chun was uneasy. Lan Yu? They had done it many times. She was a surgeon, so she naturally knew where the man's limit was. Did he not want to live anymore? Lan Yu lowered his head, kissed her, and smiled gently. Chunchin, I'm just carrying you upstairs to rest. Don't you think too much? Qin Chun was speechless. But when they went upstairs, she knew how unreliable the man's words were. He was clearly thinking about that thing. As a result, when Qin Chun could rest, he was already on his last breath. Lan Yu, on the other hand, was in great spirits. Just like that, they spent the weekend together until Qin Chun received a call saying that Huang Xia was making a scene in the hospital and was going to commit suicide if she couldn't see Lan Yu. She sat on the dining chair and hung up the phone. She suddenly lost her appetite. Looking at Lan Yu, she whispered, Do you want to go and have a look? You want me to go? Lan Yu looked at her indifferently and slowly said, In my experience, if you go, you probably won't be able to escape. Sometimes, if you can't give hope, you have to be cruel. Chunchin, you should understand this. Qin Chen's expression was a little blank. He reached out to hold her little hand and said in a low voice, Also, you want me to see her? Don't you feel uncomfortable? Yes. Qin Chun looked down and smiled at him. If you don't want to go, then don't go. You're right. However, the atmosphere after that was not the same as before, and Qin Chun did not eat as well as before. He saw it all, but he didn't say it out loud. At the end of the day, Huang Xia was still her family. Although they were not that close, she still felt uncomfortable that Huang Xia had made such a big fuss over a man. Besides, Qin Chun was a doctor, and she had personally amputated Huang Xia's leg. Lan Yu's heart ached for her, but he couldn't say it out loud. He held her hand and rubbed it. Chin, I should say that I'm really sorry. He didn't handle Huang Xia's matter well, and that was why it became like this. Qin Chin forced a smile. No, it's not your fault. She looked down. It was Sia who couldn't get over it and made such a choice. The car that hit them was arranged by Huang Sia, and she stopped it herself. Qin Chun couldn't figure out what was going on in her mind. She only had one life. Didn't she think that accidents might happen? Chapter 28:51. You have to see her, whether it's as a doctor or as a relative, Qin Chan said softly. Then she said, I will find a way to make a suitable 3D printed prosthesis for her so that she can walk normally. This was the only thing she could do for Sia. As for her heart, she had to slowly figure it out herself. Lan Yu was a little worried. Do you want me to send you there? Qin Chen smiled. You said it yourself. It's not good for her to see you. If you go like this, won't you be in trouble? I can handle it. Lan Yu nodded. Then I'll send you to the hospital. I'll pick you up after work. Qin Chen looked at him and said after a while, I have something to do at noon. I'll come over by myself tonight. He naturally understood that she had something to do. It was Rong Lei's matter. She had been with Rong Lei before, and now she wanted to be with him. She had to make it clear to Rong Lei. Lan Yu frowned. I'm worried. It's okay. Qin Chen smiled and put her hand on the back of his hand. I've known him for many years, and we haven't been together for so many years. He won't force me. She said this, but she wasn't too sure. Lan Yu looked at her for a long time before nodding. Okay, I'll take you home then. Qin Chen nodded. After breakfast, he sent her to the hospital. Before Qin Chen got out of the car, Lan Yu dragged her and said a lot of things. He felt like an old man. At this time, he also forgot that Qin Chen had a sharp tongue. That was probably what it meant when one cared too much. Qin Chen had been very patient and didn't show any impatience. He finally finished what he needed to say and looked at her gently. Chun-Chen, do you think I'm annoying? She smiled. No. Lan Yu finally let her out of the car and watched her walk towards the elevator. He didn't leave immediately. Instead, he sat in the car and smoked, looking at her back. Qin Chen went back to his office first and changed into a doctor's robe. A nurse came in and said hesitantly that Huang Xia was making trouble. Did you inject him with tranquilizers? Qin Chen asked indifferently. The nurse was a little angry. The patient's family is too overbearing. They refused to take the medicine and even threatened to jump off the building if you don't show up. Did you jump? Qin Chen looked at the young nurse. The nurse's lips twitched. I'm just screaming. I can't bear to die. Qin Chen raised his hand. I got it. You can leave now. The nurse nodded, but she turned her head at the door. Dr. Qin, I'll be outside. If you go over later, call me. I can protect you. Qin Chen smiled. Okay. The nurse gave him another encouraging gesture and added, Dr. Qin, we all think you and Mr. Lan Yu are more compatible. Qin Chen was stunned. Really? Yes. There was a dreamy look in the nurse's eyes. We all know that you are. The nurse stuck out her tongue and didn't say the word woman. She closed the door and Qin Chen smiled. She sat in the office and smoked a cigarette. She took Huang Xia's medical records and walked out of the door. The nurse was still at the door. Seeing her come out, she immediately followed. Dr. Qin. Chapter 28:52. Unexpectedly, the nurse asked, Dr. Qin, do you often change your clothes when you are with Mr. Lan? Do you wear them or Mr. Lan? Qin Chen was speechless. He took the medical record and knocked on her head, and then walked into the elevator. He was in a relaxed mood at first, but when he walked to the ward, he was not so relaxed. In the ward, Huang Xia was lying expressionlessly, and Huang Xia's mother was very excited when she saw Qin Chen. She went forward and grabbed Qin Chen's collar and said hoarsely, Where's Lan Yu? You said that Lan Yu was going to marry Xia. Where is he? Qin Chen had never been a kind person. He looked at Huang Xia's mother, who was also her elder, and said softly, I am with him. Not only was Huang Xia's mother stunned, but Huang Xia was also stunned. There were tears on her face, and she looked at Qin Chen. Are you with him? Her voice was a little torn, and then she laughed and cried. Qin Chen, you said that you are with him, then what am I? Did my leg break in vain? She patted the emptiness on her side. This place will be empty forever. There is no flesh, blood, or bones. You cut it off with your own hands. Remember? Her expression became fierce. You did it on purpose. You were afraid that I would take away Lan Yu, so you deliberately cut off my leg. Could have been kept, right? Qin Chun, you are a vicious person. You don't deserve to be a doctor. Huang Xia said hoarsely, you are so vicious. You broke my leg and you also took away Lan Yu. Why do you want to take away everything from me? Do you want to ruin my life? Looking at the crazy Huang Xia, the nurse on the side couldn't help but refute. Dr. Qin is the best doctor. If he didn't cut off your leg at that time, you wouldn't have been able to save your life. Now you are talking nonsense and being ungrateful. Huang Xia was stunned. Maybe she didn't expect that a nurse would dare to talk back to her. But her mother immediately rushed over and tore the nurse. What do you know? If it weren't for Xia saving this ungrateful person, would her leg be like this? Qin Chen, you pay for Xia's leg. Her leg can't recover and you can't live well either. Your leg or Lan Yu, you choose one. Huang Xia's mother used to be a rich family, but in recent years, she had a better life. Huang Xia was an only daughter, so she couldn't distinguish right from wrong. Qin Chen's eyes quietly fell on Huang Xia's face and asked lightly, Xia, why you lost your leg? Didn't you tell your mother? Huang Xia was stunned. But then she said, I broke my leg to save you. Qin Chen lowered his eyes and said, I think there was a surveillance camera at that time, and it was not difficult to find the driver. Maybe we should find that person, and it is good for everyone to find out the truth. If you want to pay for your leg, let the person who hit you pay for your leg. What do you think? She said word by word, find that person, and I will personally cut off her leg and connect it to your leg. Huang Xia was stunned. She didn't expect Qin Chen to have such a move. The nurse on the side was very happy. This shameless woman was shameless. Last time in the hospital, she also took the initiative to pester Mr. Lan. She was the third party, and this third party was still so righteous. And now it seemed that this matter was not simple. Chapter 28:53. The nurse sneered and said, Dr. Qin is right. Find that person and give her leg to you, but don't call her if it's not suitable. After all, it's not the original. How could Huang Xia stand what the nurse said? She hugged her head and screamed, Mom, let them out. I don't want to see them and I don't want to see Qin Chen. She cried hysterically. She must have seduced Lan Yu. It must be. Otherwise, Lan Yu had already promised to marry me. Why did he change his mind? It must be her, Mom. She hurt me. The nurse at the side opened her eyes. Huang Xia was already in her 20s. In her eyes, she was a giant baby who asked her parents to give her what she wanted. If she wanted a man, she asked her mother to throw a tantrum. Was it something that could be obtained by throwing a tantrum? Even if she got it, what was the point of getting it if the man didn't love her? The nurse said, You hurt yourself. Can you blame others? Huang Xia screamed again, Mom, let her out. Get out. I don't want to see anyone. Mother Huang immediately said sternly, Go, go. The nurse wasn't a pushover. If you don't want to stay in Shangyuan, no one will stop you. You can transfer to another hospital. She secretly thought that it would be best to transfer them to a mental hospital. It would be best for both mother and daughter to go together and get a VIP room that suited their status. Huang Xia was sick, and her mother was even more sick. Qin Chen was also a little speechless. In the past, Huang Xia's family wasn't too close, but in her impression, they were normal. But now it seemed that they were simply sick. She originally felt a little guilty, but now it was completely unnecessary. From the beginning to the end, Huang Xia reaped what she sowed. She was lucky that she didn't play with her life. Just as she was about to turn around and leave, Qin Chen couldn't take it anymore and started to cry. Qin Chen, you're going back on your words. You said that you're going to let Lan Yu be with me and marry me. Qin Chen paused. This kind of thing, no one can force the other. Huang Xia laughed coldly. Then you can at least not be with him, right? Don't tell me that he asked to be with you, I don't believe it. He hates you to death. He hates you to death for being with another man. Qin Chen, Don't you think you're dirty? Don't you think you're a pervert? Do you think that Lan Yu will love you for the rest of his life? Look at yourself in the mirror. Do you think that Lan Yu will always love you? In your dreams. Qin Chun turned his head and was about to refute when a familiar man said, I will always love her. Qin Chun was stunned and turned around. Lan Chun stood at the door and Lan Chun. Lan is Lan Chun. Lan Chun. Lan Chun, Lan, Huang, T, Li Chun. I'd. Huang Xia knows what she has done. Chapter 2854. Qin Chun looked at Lan Yu's ugly face and found it funny. She pulled him and said, All right, let's go. He pulled her hand and said, Come with me. Qin Chun didn't know what to do with him. She smiled and walked out with him. Back in her office, she made a cup of coffee for him and quietly brewed it while she was in a daze. When it was ready, she would serve it to him. Lan Yu didn't take the coffee but pulled her to his side and said, Aren't you angry that she said that to you? Qin Chun smiled and shook her head. There's nothing to be angry about. She paused and continued, She lost a leg. She's much worse than me. She touched her hair with her fingers. Hair can grow but legs can't grow. Lan Yu's gaze landed on her slender fingers. With a gentle tug, he pulled her against his shoulder and murmured, Chanchin, I'm still a little unsure. I can't believe you're with me just like this. You clearly liked him so much in the past. After so many years, it's not easy to change your habits. Just like how I like to wear men's clothes and make myself look like a man, right? She tilted her head and smiled. Do you think I suddenly want to wear women's clothes and change back to my original appearance? She said slowly, When your state of mind changes, everything changes. Her fingers stroked his deep facial features, and she said softly, I will solve everything. He grabbed her hand and placed it in his palm, not letting her leave. He slowly caressed it, and after a long time he said, But I think it's better if I do it. Just like today, I shouldn't let my woman be treated like this. Qin Chun shook his head. Lan Yu, I'm not that weak. You don't have to worry about me. I'll talk to Lan Yu. Originally, there was nothing to talk about, but when she and Lan Yu separated, she was indeed with Rong Lei. It didn't matter if he didn't say it, but the power behind Rong Lei made Qin Chun afraid. Moreover, there was a woman sandwiched between two men. It was better not to see each other. She smiled and comforted him. Don't worry, I will handle it properly. Lan Yu's dark eyes locked onto hers. There was a lot of gentleness in his eyes. He didn't let go of her, and she didn't struggle. Instead, she sat in his arms and whispered, Why did you come back? Aren't you going to the company? Lan Yu smiled lightly. I was worried, so I came back to take a look. His thin lips kissed the corner of her mouth. Our usually so venomous Dr. Qin is actually being bullied. I was going easy on her. Qin Chun glared at him. You still have the nerve to say that? Didn't you invite her? He smiled and patted her face. Weren't you the one who cried and wanted to get back together with me? Qin Chen's face was a little hot, and she was so angry that she bit him on the cheek. Lan Yu's eyes darkened. He stared at her and said in a low voice, Qin Chen, have you thought it through? This time I won't let you leave. She looked at him and smiled. I won't leave you. His eyes became even more gentle. In the end, he probably had to worry about the meeting, so he left first. But before he left, he still drank the coffee she made. Qin Chun drank 2 cups of coffee in the office after she left. Then he called Rong Lei. It had been 2 days since they last parted. Chapter 2855. The moment the phone was connected, Qin Chen's voice was a little hoarse. Rong Lei, I have something to say to you. If it's important, then let's talk when we meet. Rong Lei's tone was very indifferent. I'm at the villa. Come here. His tone was no longer as gentle as before, but a little domineering. Qin Chen pursed his lips. Rong Lei, we've known each other for so long. Don't you want to meet me? Rong Lei's voice was cold. Chen Chen, you've forgotten the past, but I haven't. Qin Chen agreed in the end, not because he couldn't forget the past, but because he couldn't forget the powerful force behind Rong Lei. She couldn't offend him too much. She drove the white sports car and arrived at his villa an hour later. As soon as she entered, Anna was already in the hall to greet her. Master is in the kitchen. Miss Qin, this way please. Qin Chun nodded and followed her. Anna led the way but soon left. Qin Chun stood at the entrance of a bright and tidy Western-style kitchen. He looked at Rong Lei, who was wearing a white shirt and a pair of iron-gray pants. He looked very expensive. At this time, he was standing in front of the counter with a Western chef beside him. He was communicating with the kitchen. Seeing Qin Chun at the door, he said something to the person and the chef left with a smile. Rong Lei began to cook and said, "Why don't you come in since you're here?" Qin Chun looked at him and said slowly, "When did you learn how to cook?" Rong Lei looked down at the fine wounds on his hand and smiled. "Just these 2 days." He looked up. "When you were with Lan Yu, I called the chef and learned how to cook at home for 2 days. Chen Chen, come here. It'll be ready in a moment." He smiled at her. Qin Chen walked over slowly and stood beside him. "Rong Lei, I have something to tell you," she said softly. Rong Lei was still looking at the fine wounds on his hand. He calmly said, "Let's wait until we eat. It doesn't matter." She tilted her head and looked at him. "You won't even give me this little bit of time, right?" Qin Chen shook his head. "Okay." She sat at the small dining table and looked at him quietly. He was still perfect, with no blind spots. He looked good in anything, but now he seemed to be obsessed with haute couture clothes. Qin Chen used to be a very particular person, but when she saw Rong Lei like this, she felt a little tired. He felt very tired. Instead, she recalled how Lan Yu would casually put on a pair of jeans after showering. He looked very good in them, especially the t-shirt, which was firm and powerful. He also liked to stand on the terrace topless and smoke a cigarette. Qin Chen smiled slightly, and Rong Lei caught this smile. He came over with a plate of curry chicken wings and said lightly, "The bottom layer is a layer of mashed potatoes mixed with ketchup. Tastes very good. The chef just now is a Michelin chef who used to cook for the British royal family." Qin Chen listened and felt a little numb. She used to pursue delicacy, but at this moment, she didn't feel anything. She even felt that it was a little ridiculous and exaggerated. Rong Lei brought over 2 exquisite plates with dishes on them. It was obvious that he was going to eat with her. "I also baked an egg pudding for you." He leaned forward and placed his hands on the back of her chair. "Wait for me." Chapter 28:56. He also opened a bottle of red wine and swirled it gently. "To celebrate my first time cooking for a girl." Qin Chen couldn't help saying, "Rong Lei, you don't have to do this." He stopped her, sat opposite her, and raised his glass. "I told you we'll talk after we eat." Qin Chen looked at the glass of wine in his hand and lost her appetite. However, she still tried her best to eat the food. It did taste good. With the guidance of the top chef Michelson, the taste couldn't be too bad. Rong Lei looked at her with a deep gaze, and then said softly, "The dessert is also very good." Qin Chen looked at him and didn't remind him that she actually didn't like desserts, but she still ate it. She only took 2 bites when she noticed something strange. She picked out something hard and put it in the clean water. It was a perfect pink diamond ring, dazzling to the eyes. Although Qin Chen didn't like these, she had seen it in a magazine. This diamond was called Pink Beauty, and it had been auctioned for more than $1 billion a few years ago. Now it was in front of her. She looked up at the man opposite her. Rong Lei took the ring, got up, walked behind her, and hugged her from behind. "Chen Chen," he said in a hoarse voice, "I can do what he can do, and I can do what he can't." His tone became solemn. "Marry me." Then, he took her hand and tried to put the ring on her. The Pink Beauty was dazzling, and there was no woman in the world who wouldn't love it. It was like the most beautiful tear of a beauty. Qin Chen lowered her eyes and looked at it. In the end, she withdrew her fingers and said, "Rong Lei, I'm sorry. I can't promise you." "Because of him?" There was a tinge of nervousness in Rong Lei's voice, but he still did not let go of her. In terms of looks, status, and ability, which part of me is inferior to him? Qin Chun pursed her lips again and again. She turned her head and looked at Rong Lei. I've promised him that we're together. Her voice became firm. Rong Lei, let's break up. She changed her words. Actually, we've been separated for a long time, since 12 years ago, right? Rong Lei's body froze, and the aura surrounding her became deathly still. He took a sip of red wine and leaned closer to her. Are you serious, Qinchin? She grunted, really? I like him. What do you like about him? You like that he can cook and I can cook too. Or you like that he can draw. Now that his hands are disabled, he probably can't draw anymore. I still like the hotel he runs. I can destroy everything he has at any time. Qinchin, I can give you everything, including your dreams. I can help you with your dreams that you don't want to realize. You will stand at the top of the world and be admired by thousands of people. Rong Lei's voice became a little soft. Qinchin, don't you like this? I don't like it. Qin Chen's voice was very calm. Rong Lei, I don't like this kind of life. I like to be alone, or to have someone with me. That's enough. She lowered her eyes and looked at the expensive cutlery on the dining table, as well as the pink diamond in his hand. I used to like those things because I was chasing after someone, but now that I've given up on him, I can naturally give up on these things too. Chapter 28:57. They were very similar. He was much taller than her, but her aura was no less imposing than his. She said in a low voice, Rong Lei, I'm sorry. I can't continue to love you. Maybe I used to love you, but it's been too long. Or maybe you've gone too far. I can't find the feeling I had back then. She raised her head, her eyes watery. The man in front of her used to be her faith for so many years. But now she was saying goodbye to him. Rong Lei narrowed his eyes. He stared into her eyes and said softly, You're humbling yourself because of Lanyu? Are you afraid that I'll deal with him? Will you? Qin Chun smiled faintly. Rong Lei, you have your pride. Let's forget about it. Rong Lei stared at her for a long time and suddenly smiled. He calmly walked to his chair and elegantly finished his meal. Wiping his lips, he slowly said, Chun Chun, I just said that I want you to be admired by tens of thousands of people. I'm not just saying it. You can't escape just because you don't want to. He tilted his handsome face. This world is already crazy and we need a strong ruler to maintain order. Chun Chun, you'll help me, won't you? He smiled slightly. If you help me, then you can be with Lanyu. In addition, I can also help Mr. Lan's hotel business. The plan to take over the world's hotels sounds crazy, but it's not impossible. There was a faint but crazy smile in his eyes. Chun Chun, I believe in your choice. You're crazy. Qin Chun gritted his teeth. This world doesn't need that. You're crazy. Crazy? Rong Lei's eyes darkened and he kept staring at Qin Chen's eyes. Qin Chun suddenly felt dizzy and wanted to sleep. Then she realized that Rong Lei knew hypnosis and he used it on her. She slowly fell to the ground, lying on the top of the dining table. Rong Lei calmly picked up the wine beside him and sipped it elegantly. When he finished half the cup, he chuckled and said, Good girl. After that, he put down the glass and slipped the pink ring on her slender finger. Perfect size. Perfect. Chun Chun, how could I bear to give you to him? Rong Lei kissed her lips and murmured, You are mine. Forever my Chun Chun. It was quiet in the luxurious master bedroom. Anna stood behind Rong Lei and asked carefully, Master, why don't you hypnotize her and make her think that she still likes you? Rong Lei's tall figure stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling window. The night breeze caressed his black hair, making him look even more mysterious. He slowly turned around with a cold look on his face. Idiot! Can Qin Chun still master those amazing technologies when she's 12 years old? Anna was shocked and broke out in a cold sweat. She immediately looked down and said, I misspoke, Master. Get out. Rong Lei's gaze was fierce. Anna reluctantly glanced at the woman on the bed, but she still left first. As soon as she left, The person on the bed moved slightly. At this moment, she was wearing a silk negligee. The soft material clung to her body like a second layer of skin, showing off her perfect and delicate figure. She was beautiful, much more beautiful than he imagined. Did she once expose her beautiful body to other men in front of Lanyu like this? Chapter 28:58. Rong Lei looked at Qin Chun on the bed for a long time before he slowly walked to the bar. He poured himself a glass of wine and sipped it lightly. He was not in a hurry to possess her because she was his. He did not need to be impatient like a rash kid. In her heart, he was always elegant. Rong Lei took the last sip of wine and walked step by step towards the luxurious bed, and also towards the most important girl in his life. He had had many women, but no one could replace the position of Qin Chun in his heart. That was the most pure place in his youth. And now she was lying so perfectly on his bed, beautiful and holy. Rong Lei sat and gently touched her face with his slender fingers. Qin Chen's beauty was earth-shattering, and it also stirred up Rong Lei. He wanted her. This deep desire had been there for a long time, but he did not want to scare her. But now he was determined to possess her. In this way, he would also cut off the thoughts between her and Lanyu. Rong Lei raised his hand and unbuttoned his shirt, one by one. When the shirt fell down, it was a strong and muscular body. Then he gently pressed a switch. Instantly, cameras rose from all directions in the bedroom, and at least 10 of them were aimed at the luxurious bed. His face was filled with the repression of the love jade, and it was a kind of determination. He half knelt in front of Qin Chun, slowly leaned over, and kissed her lips. But before his lips could touch her, his heart was pressed by a sharp object. Rong Lei narrowed his eyes and looked down at the delicate scalpel in Qin Chen's hand. It's best not to move. This knife can cut a cow's bone in a second. Qin Chun opened her eyes and looked at Rong Lei. If you don't want to live, you can try. Rong Lei's gaze was locked onto her. His voice was low and hoarse, and there was even a hint of anger in it. Are you going to fall out with me for a mere Lanyu? He restrained his voice. Chan, have you forgotten our wonderful days in France? I haven't forgotten. Qin Chun looked at him. But I am not me, and you are not you. She smiled and said, you don't love me as much as you think. In your heart, I'm no longer Qin Chun, but a genius doctor, right? Rong Lei gently caressed her face and said softly, is that what you think? Then what do you want me to think? Qin Chun laughed mockingly. After all these years, don't you feel any heartache when you see me? For a 12-year-old girl to isolate herself for 12 years for someone she likes. You think it's normal for me to be like this. But that's because you don't love me. Rong Lei pinched her face. In this world, no one loves you more than I do. He leaned over to kiss her. The knife in Qin Chen's hand was pressed against him. A drop of blood seeped out, followed by a string of blood. Her white pajamas were soon stained with blood. But she didn't let go. Rong Lei kissed her lips gently and murmured, are you willing to kill me? Chun-Chin, are you really going to fall out with me for a man? He reached out to grab her hand as if he didn't see the wound in his heart. I don't believe that in your heart. I can't compare to him. Qin Chun looked down. You can try to touch me again. Rong Lei's body leaned down. The knife in her hand sank into his body inch by inch. Chapter 28:59. She suddenly withdrew her hand, and his blood spurted out. Rong Lei was still smiling. What's wrong, Qin-Chin? You can't bear to see me like this? Qin-Chin looked at him. You're crazy. Rong Lei chuckled, and his face was pale. I'm crazy. He gently stroked her little face with his bloody hand. Qin-Chin, I'll let you go, but you can try what will happen if you stay with him. Will this man be able to persevere to the end like you? What do you want to do? Qin Chen's pupils contracted. Rong Lei looked down at his wound and said lightly, bandage my wound, or I'll probably bleed to death, and you won't be able to walk out of here. He propped himself up and pointed at a cabinet. There's a medicine box in there. Qin Chen looked at him for a while, but still walked over and took out the medicine box. When she was bandaging his wound, Rong Lei grabbed her hand and said painfully, Chen, you really don't love me anymore? Chen looked at him and said softly, I'm sorry. She smiled again. It was a very faint smile. I've waited for you for 12 years. If you came back 1 or 2 years earlier, I don't think there would be Lan Yu. Sometimes fate was like this. When you wanted to look back, that person was already gone. Rong Lei's face was a little ugly, but he didn't say anything. Chen silently bandaged his wound. When he was done, he said self-mockingly, if it wasn't for him, you probably wouldn't be willing to talk to me, let alone bandage my wound. Chen looked at him. Rong Lei, our relationship is not as bad as you think. Chen, I won't give up. Rong Lei slowly stood up and walked to the floor-to-ceiling window. After a long time, he tilted his head slightly. Either you kill me just now, or you walk out and worry about whether you and Lan Yu can last long. He smiled faintly. Chen, you said I don't love you. You said you waited for me for so many years. But do you know all these years? Do you know how it feels to hold on to one's last breath in the midst of being shattered and to live on for the good in one's heart? He looked at her. I spent nearly 6 years on the sickbed. I lived like a dying dog. At that time, you were all I had. If I had known that you would like someone else, I would have come back to you even if I had to crawl. Rong Lei lowered his eyes. If you mind those women, I won't touch them in the future. This was the biggest concession he could make to her. After all, the Rong family needed him to expand their family. Because there weren't many people, the family hoped that he could have more women and children. However, he was sure that the eldest son would be born by Chen and would be his successor in the future. He was sure that, in the end, he would be the one to get Chen and not the man named Lan Yu. How could that man be worthy of his Chen? Chen stood up and put on his shirt. He said calmly, that's it. Rong Lei, you don't have to go easy on me the next time we meet. I don't need to either. His story was very touching. Perhaps in the past, she would have been touched and would have stayed behind regardless of everything. She would even go against the entire world for the person in her heart because he was her entire world. But now, she knew that the world wasn't just black and white. There were many other colors. Chapter 2860. This world was free, and it didn't belong to anyone. As for her, she should be free to choose the life she wanted and the person she wanted. Rong Lei, I'm sorry. She whispered, I want to be with him. After saying that, she walked straight out. Rong Lei paused and looked at her. Chen took off the ring on his finger and placed it on the bed. He said softly, this doesn't belong to me. His lips moved, but he didn't say anything in the end. She still chose Lan Yu, the man who he thought was inferior to him. When Chen opened the door, Anna was standing at the door. She subconsciously stopped Chen. Let her go. Rong Lei's voice was very indifferent. Anna didn't move, and her voice was a little tense. Master, why did you let her go? However, as soon as she finished speaking, there was a bloody mark on her neck. An exquisite blade grazed her neck, and the last bit was stuck in her flesh. If it had been a little bit more, Anna would have died immediately. Anna narrowed her eyes and raised her gun. Put it down. Let her go. Rong Lei's voice was stern. Anna wanted to say something, but she didn't dare to say anything and retreated. Chen looked at Rong Lei in the end. He was looking at her, and there was a depth in his eyes that she couldn't see. She still left and drove away. Anna walked into the master bedroom and touched Rong Lei's wound. Her voice was trembling. Master, why did you allow her to do this to you? She paused, and a murderous look appeared in her eyes. I'll kill her. Rong Lei slapped her and said coldly, if you dare to touch her, I'll make sure you don't have a single hair left. Anna was a little unwilling, but she didn't dare to say anything. She lowered her head and stood aside. Rong Lei was still standing in front of the floor-to-ceiling window, watching Chen's car drive away. He smiled bitterly. Chen, there are many things that I can't choose. If I could choose, I would choose that year when the sunflowers bloomed in France, and I would choose to never leave you. He looked at her and clenched his fists. He believed that one day she would come back. Qin Chun drove back to Lan Yu's villa, but he hadn't returned yet. She went straight to the master bedroom upstairs to change into Lan Yu's clothes. She threw the bloody pajamas and Rong Lei's shirt into the trash can. Before she could deal with them, Lan Yu came back. Qin Chun for a moment when he heard the footsteps. Then Lan Yu came back. He looked at her short hair, his black shirt, and a pair of sweatpants he had worn in college. He couldn't help but smile. It fits, I told him. Qin Chun didn't hide it. He let me go, but he won't let me go. I told him. Qin Chun didn't hide it. He let me go, but he won't let me go. Lan Yu, are you sure you want to be with me? It might be dangerous. Lan Yu kissed her. Of course I won't leave you, Chun Chun. She smiled, grabbed his collar, and said softly, you have to be careful, or I'll be worried. Rong Lei wouldn't do anything to her, but he wouldn't show mercy to Lan Yu, so she was very worried. Lan Yu nodded. I've hired the best mercenary group. There are about 50 people. It shouldn't be a problem to protect my safety. Qin Chun felt a little uneasy. She vaguely knew that Rong Lei didn't give up not only because of their relationship, but also because of her and York's research. Chapter 2861. She didn't dare to think too much about it. She only knew that she couldn't leave with Rong Lei. She had never been afraid of anything, but at this moment, she felt afraid. She hugged Lan Yu and whispered, Lan Yu, I'm afraid that my decision is wrong. How could it be? Lan Yu patted her back and said, Chan Chin, I can give up everything for you, even if it's... Before he could say the word life, his lips were covered by her. Don't say it. She pursed her lips and looked at him with a gentleness that he had never seen before. He smiled. All right, I won't say it. He reached out and held her in his arms, murmuring, Chanchin, you must promise me not to give up. He looked at her, suddenly picked her up and threw her on the bed like a madman. When he leaned over, Qin Chun covered his lips. Lan Yu, what are you doing? Lan Yu pressed her hands to the side of his body and bit open the buttons one by one, murmuring, in that case, I have to keep the Lan family's descendants. He was actually joking and wanted to be intimate with her. He saw that she was in a bad mood, so he wanted to comfort her. Qin Chun took it seriously. She struggled for a while but couldn't break free, so she bit her lips and said, Lan Yu, stop fooling around. We can't have children. Why? He kissed her indiscriminately, but he could smell the faint smell of blood on her. He paused in his movements and looked at her with a deep gaze. Qin Chun bit her lips. At least not now. She softened her voice, broke free from his hands and stroked his handsome face. We will have children in the future. Lan Yu, listen to me. Okay? She was worried about his safety, and she didn't want to have a child at this time. Lan Yu looked at her for a while and smiled. Okay. He was just fooling around with her. Although he was a little embarrassed now, he had lost his interest. He got up and kissed her. I'm going to wash my hands and cook for you. What do you want to eat? Qin Chun closed his eyes and let him kiss him. He smiled and said, I like everything you cook. Lan Yu smiled. Seafood baked rice with a little more flavor and soup? Oh. She reached out and wrapped her arms around his neck. Do it well. His gaze became deeper. Actually, there are some things that I can do better. Do you want to try it tonight? He kissed her suggestively before walking into the bathroom. As soon as he entered the bathroom, before he could clean himself up, he received a text message on his phone. Lan Yu took a look. It was a photo. Qin Chun was lying on the bed with a man on top of him. They were kissing and the scene was beautiful. Qin Chun was wearing spaghetti strap pajamas, the very sexy kind. Lan Yu clenched his fists and looked in the direction of the bedroom. At this time, his gaze fell on the trash can again. He squatted down and picked up the pajamas from it. The pajamas with blood stains and a man's shirt. It should be Rong Lei's because the brand was so cool. He looked at it attentively. He didn't know when Qin Chun had stood at the door of the bathroom. She said calmly, Do you trust me? Lan Yu looked at her sideways, stood up and handed the phone to her silently. Chin Chun only took a look at it and returned it to him. When Lan Yu took the phone, he grabbed her hand and pulled her into his arms. Chun, I'm sorry. He kissed her hair and hugged her tightly. It won't happen again. I won't let you see these things again. Chin Chun was a little breathless from his hug, but she thought that he might have misunderstood something. Chapter 2862. Lan Yu hugged her even tighter. His face was buried in her hair, and he said in a low voice, Chun, it's not like that. He wasn't an old-fashioned man who would think that it was the woman's fault for losing her innocence. On the contrary, it was his negligence and he didn't protect her well. However, he was still very happy and thankful. Even if she didn't say it, he could almost imagine the situation at that time. She made his heart ache. Lan Yu hugged her for a long time before he said in a low voice, I'm going to cook. However, Chin Chun hugged him. I'll go with you. He looked at her and smiled. Okay. He carried her downstairs, naturally. Chin Chun sat in the dining room and watched him cook. She said softly, Lan Yu, I'm fine. I can protect myself. You don't have to blame yourself. She could tell that he was blaming himself. Lan Yu turned around and gave her a comforting smile. Then he said softly, I'll protect you in the future. He was stunned for a moment before he walked over and hugged her gently. He buried his face and whispered, Promise me. Chun, don't go see him again. Chin Chun rested her face on his shoulder and said, I promise you. Lan Yu looked at her and pinched her face. He said softly, Good girl. Chin Chun smiled. Let's forget about Lan Yu. Okay? She hugged him tightly. Nothing happened. Rong Lei was injured. Lan Yu's body was a little stiff, but he didn't show it. He just smiled and said, I know. He cooked for her. After eating, he threw the clothes in the trash can upstairs. When he came back, he looked at her and said, Don't you want to go shopping? I'll go with you. Chin Chun nodded and followed him into the car. It was something that they had been looking forward to for a long time, but because of what happened today, they were a little depressed. Especially Chin Chun, his expression was a little indifferent, and he didn't speak along the way. Lan Yu parked the car in the parking lot of a shopping mall. He turned his head and whispered, Chin, if you're in a bad mood, let's do it another day. She shook her head. No, let's go up. She hugged his arm and smiled at him. I want to go shopping. She was wearing his black shirt today, which made her look a lot more casual, but still masculine. Lan Yu smiled and leaned over to kiss her. His voice was low and husky. Okay. He unbuckled his seatbelt and got out of the car, then went around to the other side to open the door for her. After she got out of the car, Lan Yu held her hand. Chin Chun glanced at him. Lan Yu said in a low voice, Chun, I don't care about those looks. He tightened his grip on her hand and walked into the elevator. From this moment on, he wanted to be with her and let the whole world know that he was with Chin Chun. There were several people in the elevator. When they came in and out, everyone looked at them. Not only did Lan Yu not avoid her, but he also put her on his shoulder. Both of them were good-looking. This scene was not only not unbearable, but also very pleasing to the eye. Chin Chun instinctively wanted to struggle, but Lan Yu held her down. Chun, she looked up at him. His hand held hers, and his eyes were full of determination. Chin Chun smiled faintly and held his hand. At this moment, she felt loved. This was probably the craziest day for Chin Chun. She went to the women's clothing department and tried on the women's clothes one by one. Chapter 2863. The waitress went from shock to amazement. She slowly relaxed. Casual wear, formal wear, pajamas, nothing was left out. Lan Yu's card was about to be maxed out. Chin Chun leaned on his shoulder. Women are scary when they squander. I just found out. After Lan Yu signed, he pinched her chin. This is not as good as your previous set of cups. Chin Chun tilted her head. So men are scarier when they squander? What kind of man are you? Lan Yu chuckled and pulled her downstairs. On the second floor, Chin Chun could no longer move. Lan Yu looked at her. What are you looking at? Qin Chun pointed at the wigs. Will you buy them for me? Lan Yu's gaze paused on the wigs. Do you want them? Yes. She nodded vigorously, acting coquettishly. Lan Yu smiled. He looked at her, then at the wigs. Finally, he took one and put it on for her. It was still short, but it was very pretty. Once she put it on, she looked completely different. Lan Yu's gaze was a little dazed. After a long time, he pulled her to the mirror. Is it weird? Qin Chun asked with a smile. Lan Yu didn't say anything. He just brought her to the mirror. In the mirror, she looked like herself. Qin Chun held her breath. She had worn women's clothes before, but now she had changed her hairstyle. She couldn't believe it. Chun, I like you like this. Lan Yu murmured. Very cute. Qin Chun tilted her head. No one has ever said that I am cute. Then from now on there will be. He kissed her cheek. Every day. Qin Chun hugged him and didn't say anything. She felt that this happiness and sweetness was unreal. She was afraid that in the blink of an eye, he would disappear and she would return to her original self. It turned out that being loved and truly embraced was such a blissful feeling. Lan Yu, we will always be together, right? She asked in a low voice. Lan Yu smiled. Of course. Qin Chun, on the other hand, felt very cold. This night they go home. In his luxurious king-sized bed, they made love to each other again and again, until late into the night. In the middle of the night, Lan Yu woke up, but there was no one beside him. He touched it, opened his eyes and turned on the light. Qin Chun was not in the bedroom. He put on a pair of pajama pants and walked out. He saw Qin Chun standing by the window of the living room, smoking. She rarely smoked except for drinking some coffee. She could be considered a person with extreme self-control. However, she was smoking in the middle of the night. Lan Yu knew that she had something on her mind, and it was related to Rong Lei. He walked over and hugged her from behind, murmuring, "Why aren't you sleeping?" Qin Chun tilted his head and smiled slightly. "What about you? Can't sleep either?" "No, it's because you're not by my side." He hugged her tightly and put his face on the side of her neck, kissing her. Qin Chun put out the cigarette. "Let's sleep together." Lan Yu tilted his head and looked at her. Chun. Yes, what's up? Qin Chun turned around and hugged his neck. Lan Yu thought for a moment and said slowly, "I may have a battle with Rong Lei." Under her gaze, he smiled bitterly. "You should know the power of the Rong family in France and their businesses all over the world." Qin Chun nodded. "I will ask my brother to help you." Chapter 2864. Lan Yu wasn't someone who didn't know the immensity of heaven and earth. He didn't think that a Grand Hyatt could stop a big French family, especially when Rong Lei might have some unknown secrets. Qin Chun buried her face in his neck and suddenly said in a trembling voice, "Lan Yu, I'm scared." She had never been so vulnerable. She had always been indifferent to life and death because she had experienced too much. But now, she was particularly afraid that he would be hurt, especially when this person was someone she used to care about so much. If Lan Yu was hurt, she would blame herself. Lan Yu held her in his arms and comforted her gently. "Don't be afraid. Chinin, I'll be fine." She looked at him and asked, "You promise?" He smiled slightly and said, "I promise." Qin Chun then went to bed with him, but she didn't feel sleepy when she lay in bed. He patted her back and comforted her while whispering, "Chinin, don't smoke in the future. You don't like it?" She asked softly and put her little face on his shoulder. "I thought you would say that I'm manly." Lan Yu didn't expect her to be naughty, so he patted her gently and said, "I mean, we will have children in the future. Smoking is not good for children." Children? Qin Chun was stunned for a moment. They had taken precautions recently so they wouldn't have children. Besides, she wouldn't allow them to have children now. Although she thought so, she still nodded and said, "Okay, I won't smoke in the future." He kissed her with satisfaction and said, "Go to sleep." Qin Chun closed her eyes, but she didn't fall asleep for a long time. She was afraid that he would be worried, so she didn't open her eyes. Lan Yu naturally knew that, but it was good for her to close her eyes and rest. He went to smoke. The two of them had their own thoughts and didn't fall asleep until it was almost dawn. Later, Lan Yu became very busy. Even with Yi Muyun's support, Lan Yu was still surrounded by enemies. The Rong family's influence was everywhere, especially in Grand Hyatt's overseas business, which was beyond the reach of Boyi Group. Lan Yu became a flying man. Qin Chun could only see him for 2 or 3 days a week, but she didn't complain and waited for him in the villa. Originally, she wanted to fly with him but was rejected by Lan Yu. He said it was too hard. What Qin Chun didn't know was that Lan Yu was thinking about something else. He was afraid that Rong Lei would do something during his flight, and he was afraid that Chun Chun would be implicated. He did not dare to put her in danger. Even if something happened to him, he wanted her to be well. This time, it wasn't him and Rong Lei fighting over a woman. It was him, Lan Yu, who wanted to use his life to protect a woman. In his intuition, Rong Lei not only wanted Chun Chun, but also his ambition. Although he was tired of dealing with them, he did not suffer a crushing defeat. Just like that, a month passed, and the situation in B City became particularly tense because of the confrontation between the two sides. The Rong family used their diplomatic relations, and the pressure on Grand Hyatt Group doubled. If it weren't for the support of Zhou Chongguang and Yi Muyun, it would have collapsed long ago. At night, in the largest club in B City, in a private room, Lan Yu and Yi Muyun sat separately. Yi Muyun put a document in front of Lan Yu and said in a low voice, "I hope this will be useful to you." Lan Yu did not open it immediately, but lit a cigarette and smoked slowly. The Rong family promised Mr. Lin to fully support his re-election. Chapter 2865. He paused for a moment. This is the evidence of the collusion between the Rong family and the Lin family. The higher-ups have also noticed it. If the Lin family can be defeated, Rong Lei will have one less backer in the country, and it will be much more difficult for him to do things. As he said this, he looked at Lan Yu. But it may be that your overseas career will be severely damaged. Lan Yu, have you thought about it? Lan Yu smiled. Chun Chun doesn't care about that. His face was surprisingly gentle. She likes the dishes I cook and the paintings I draw. What I have now can also let her live her previous life, but now she likes to live a simple life. Yi Muyun agreed with this point. Recently, Qin Chun seemed to have changed. He used to be extremely luxurious, but now he seemed to have returned to simplicity. He thought for a moment. Take these back and have a good look. As for the next step, think about it carefully. Yi Muyun's voice became a little hoarse. Rong Lei is a dangerous person. You have to be careful. Lan Yu nodded, picked up the things and stood up. But when he held the door handle, he suddenly turned his head. Brother, after this matter is over, I want to marry Qin Chun. Yi Muyun smiled lightly. As long as Qin Chun is willing, it's fine. Lan Yu's eyes were a little warm. Thank you. Yi Muyun also stood up, walked over, and patted Lan Yu's shoulder. No, we should thank you. Thank you for giving Chun Chun love. Thank you for not giving up on her. Others didn't know how much Lan Yu had done for Qin Chun, but Yi Muyun was very clear about it. Lan Yu was moved. Because I love her. I have loved her since a long time ago. With that, he walked out. Half a month later, under Lan Yu's action, Mr. Lin fell from power and was imprisoned. Madame Lin suddenly fell ill. Lin Cece disappeared. She was nowhere to be seen. The Rong family's domestic enterprises withdrew one after another. Rong Lei suddenly lost his original status in B City and no longer had the ability to summon wind and rain. That night, Lan Yu returned to the villa. Qin Chun was there. She was sleeping on her side. Her hair had grown a lot longer and was a little messy as it stuck to her face. And he realized that she had put on some weight. He smiled and pinched her face. Piggy. Qin Chun opened his eyes. When he could see clearly, he reached out and hugged him. Lan Yu, you're back? I'm back. His voice was hoarse. It had been half a month since they last met. He leaned against the headboard and held her in his arms. Did you miss me? I want to. Qin Chun propped himself up. But you never come back. She was very worried, but she didn't dare to say it out loud. Otherwise, he would be even more worried outside. Looking at him now, she found that he had lost a lot of weight. She reached out to touch his face and murmured, "It's hard, isn't it?" He took her hand and rubbed it a few times. Then he smiled. "It's okay." Chin Chun hugged him tightly. "Lan Yu." Chun Chin. He hugged her tightly. "Everything is over. The higher-ups have already ordered Rong Lei to leave the country within 3 days. He won't have the chance to hurt you again." Chin Chun smiled slightly. She knew how difficult it was. Mr. Lin had fallen. He was such a powerful figure. Speaking of which, if she hadn't saved Mr. Lin, Rong Lei might not have had the chance to be like this. Lan Yu probably knew what she was thinking. He smiled. If it wasn't Mr. Lin, there would be someone else. Chin Chun thought of Lin Cece. She didn't know where she went. Chapter 2866. When Madame Lin came, Lan Yu avoided her, so Chin Chun saw her. Chin Chun made a cup of coffee for Madame Lin and put it in front of her. He smiled and said, "Madam, you have lost a lot of weight recently." Madame Lin held the cup and looked at Chin Chun with a haggard face. She said, "Dr. Chin is a smart person. I think you know why I am here." Chin Chun would not admit it directly. He just smiled and said, "Lin Cece has not been here." Madame Lin's lips moved. She looked embarrassed. After a while, she said in a low voice, "I am not here because of Cece. I am here for old Lin." Madame Lin said. Her tears finally fell. She knelt in front of Chin Chun and said, "Dr. Chin, I beg you to save old Lin again. He was just confused and cooperated with Rong Lei. Old Lin's body is not good. I am afraid that he will die if he is locked up." Chin Chen's heart was touched. She stepped forward and helped Madame Lin up. She lowered her eyes and said, "It's not that I don't want to help Madame, but I don't want to interfere in this matter. Moreover, Madame Lin should also know the cause and effect of this matter. If there is anything that offended you, it is because we were forced to do so." Madame Lin wiped her tears and said, "I know. I don't really understand what's going on, but I've already advised old Lin to stay away from Rong Lei's evil spirit. But old Lin is already so old, yet he still wants to be in a higher position. I'm not blaming Mr. Lan. I'm just here to beg Dr. Chin to show mercy and let old Lin enjoy his old age. Even if it's in a small town, I promise we won't appear in B City again." Madame Lin was a beautiful woman. She was crying like a pear blossom in the rain. Chin Chun sighed in his heart. He was probably used to being a man. Now he even had tender feelings for the fairer sex. But she could not make the decision on this matter. A retired Mr. Lin wouldn't cause much trouble, but she still had to listen to Lan Yu when it came to the stakes. She did not agree, nor did she refuse. She only lightly said, "I will talk to Lan Yu. Madame Lin should go back first. I will reply to you when there is news." When Madame Lin heard this, she sighed in her heart. She had always liked Chin Chin. Now that she knew he was a woman and treated her so politely, she felt even more reluctant. If Dr. Chin was a man and could be with Cece, she wouldn't have to worry so much. Madame Lin left with a touch of regret. Chin Chun sat there and drank the rest of the coffee. Lan Yu walked over and sat at the place where Madame Lin was sitting. Chin Chun looked at him. "I'll make you another cup of coffee." "All right." Lan Yu took out a cigarette from the pack on the coffee table and smoked it calmly. He smiled as he watched her skillfully brew coffee. "Chen Chen, in the future, if you don't want to be a doctor, you might as well open a coffee shop." Chin Chun made the coffee and smiled. "You don't like my profession?" He shook his head. "No, it's just that I think you like to make coffee more." Chin Chun still smiled. "Aren't you afraid that with my pickiness, I will spend all your money in less than half a year?" Thinking about it, if she sold a cup of coffee for a few thousand yuan, wouldn't he go bankrupt? Lan Yu smiled. "It's not that bad." He walked over, put the cigarette in his mouth, and hugged her from behind. Chapter 2867. "Did you say so?" Chin Chen smiled and then concentrated on making a cup of excellent coffee for him. Lan Yu took a sip and looked at her. Very good. Qin Chen smiled and sat down. She hesitated for a moment and said, You heard what Madame Lin said just now. What are you going to do? Lan Yu put down the cup in his hand and held her slender hand. He rubbed it a few times and said, Are you soft-hearted? Qin Chen shook her head. No, I just think that if Mr. Lin is no longer in danger, it is better to do him a favor. After all, he is no longer there, but some forces in the circle are still there. It is better to leave some leeway. Lan Yu fixed his eyes on her and said slowly, It is impossible for him to return to the center of power. It will not hinder us. Qin Chen, what you said is also good. Leave some leeway. Qin Chen smiled. He looked at her indifferent look and pinched her face. Why are you not happy? Didn't you ask for it on behalf of others? She was still indifferent. You also said that I asked for it on behalf of others. If you want to get benefits, you may have to ask Madame Lin or Lin Cece. As long as you don't think Madame Lin is old and you don't think Lin Cece is mischievous, I have no opinion. Lan Yu stared at her. I think you are the one who is more and more mischievous. Qin Chen snorted softly. You probably didn't notice Madame Lin's regretful expression when she saw me. She still wants you to be her son-in-law? Lan Yu looked at her and then held her in his arms. His hands were unruly. Let me check if you have the hardware facilities. Qin Chen was afraid of tickles. She couldn't resist it even when she pushed against him. While they were fooling around, her shirt was pulled down by him and a large area of white skin was revealed. Lan Yu's eyes were slightly deep. Qin Chen looked at him and pulled her clothes. Don't mess around. I have something serious to tell you. Lan Yu chuckled and kissed her lips. This is also a serious matter. Just as he was about to act recklessly, the door to the living room was pushed open. It was none other than Lan Yu's mother. Lan Yu's mother stared blankly at them fooling around, a little stunned. Although Qin Chen still had short hair and was still wearing a shirt, she felt that she was a girl at first sight. Moreover, it was an excessively beautiful young lady. Blue Mother's eyes were flashed, old face a red. I'll go downstairs to cook for you. When she came, how could Lan Yu continue to do it? He coughed softly and said, Mom, I'll go. He paused for a moment. Have a chat with Qin Chen. He could tell that his mother wasn't against it, so he spoke up at the right time. Blue Mother is a little uncomfortable. Qin Chen straightened his clothes, his face a little hot. Let's go downstairs together. She thought for a moment. Auntie, would you like some coffee? Lan Yu knocked her on the head and said, Don't do that. Go and make a cup of tea. Blue Mother thought that Qin Chen would be angry. She didn't know that Qin Chen just looked at her son and went downstairs to make tea. She looked at Lan Yu, who was tidying up his clothes, and asked quietly, Can this hospital inject estrogen? I think this girl is very different. Lan Yu didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Mom, Qin Chen is a girl. I just like to wear neutral clothes. Blue Mother couldn't help but complain. Where's the neutral clothes? That's men's clothes. Chapter 2868. Blue Mother said, and asked uneasily, Can you have a child? Lan Yu glanced at his mother. I've already said that Qin Chen is a girl. She's no different from other girls. Blue Mother listened to him, also a little relieved, sighed, You are like this, I am also satisfied. Don't ask your wife to be more filial, as long as you like it and live a happy life. Lan Yu smiled and went downstairs with his mother. Qin Chen's coffee is good, and the tea is naturally good. Blue Mother looks at her movements, which is really pleasing to the eye. Moreover, at this time, Qin Chen looks a little like a noble son. She sighs in her heart. If Lan Ting is here, Qin Chen is also her ideal son-in-law candidate. At the thought of her daughter, she was relieved about Lan Yu's affairs. Now they have only one son, and the most important thing is that his son is happy. Blue Mother drank the tea made by Qin Chen. Qin Chen didn't look like a little daughter-in-law at all. It was always light, but Blue Mother was also at ease. When she came, she didn't prepare. When she drank tea, she remembered it. So she took off an emerald bracelet on her hand and put it in the palm of Qin Chen. I don't think you necessarily like this. but it's a little gift from me. Lan Yu went to cook. Qin Chen and Blue Mother got along in private. She looked at the bracelet in her hand. It was of excellent quality. It was a good thing at first sight. She smiled. I like it very much. With that, she put it on her hand. This move, in fact, is not flattering, very natural, but Blue Mother is happy. The more she looks at it, the more she likes it. In addition to the change of Qin Chen, there is another point. Huang Xia, who she looked for last time, is so crazy. She heard from Lan Yu's father that she even drove to hit Qin Chen and Lan Yu. Then she pretended to save them. She didn't know that she put one of her legs on it. This is called evil people have evil retribution. Blue Mother didn't expect that the person she had seen all her life had made a mistake and liked such a madman. If Lan Yu married her, would he still have a peaceful life? Qin Chen was the best. He was calm and rational. Qin Chen turns on the TV to let the Blue Mother watch, and he takes a magazine to accompany her. There is no extra words, but it is warm. If in the past, Blue Mother must feel that she has been neglected, but now she is not sure about Qin Chen's temperament. Knowing that this is the highest level of treatment, she is also satisfied. However, while she was satisfied, she was secretly cursing herself for being so cheap. Blue Mother's psychological activities are particularly rich. Qin Chen looked over. Auntie, do you need anything else? No, very good, Blue Mother quickly said. Qin Chen smiled and didn't say anything else. She was about to look down at the magazine, but Blue Mother couldn't help but ask, Chen, when are you and Lan Yu going to get married? You are still young, but Lan Yu is not young. He should have been a father for a long time when he was in his early 30s. Qin Chen blinked. Didn't he become a father long ago? Isn't Ishu his son? Her son's dark past was dug up, and as a mother, Mother Lan didn't look good either. Her face darkened for a long time before she said, That's your older brother's child. Chun, it's not like you don't know. Lan Yu and Shui sleep in separate beds. This was his explanation, but he was cursing Lan Yu in his heart. What was he thinking back then? How could he raise someone else's wife and raise someone else's child as his own? And the child's mother didn't even know. Chapter 2869. Blue Mother didn't know that this was actually Qin Chen's skin. Qin Chen looked at Blue Mother's appearance, didn't say anything, and went to read the magazine again. Blue Mother was so excited just now that she didn't respond. She was also quite lost. She looked at it for a long time. Lan Yu stood at the door with a fruit plate, looked at them getting along, smiled and walked over. Putting down the fruit plate, he looked at his mother. Mom, you haven't tasted Qin Chen's poisonous tongue. Blue Mother gave her son a white look. Of course I haven't tasted it. I don't kiss her. After that, Blue Mother was very proud. After Lan Yu was stunned, he smiled. Qin Chen was a little annoyed and stared at him. Lan Yu ignored her, but looked at his mother. Chen and I will get married soon. As for the date, you can go back and discuss it with Dad. And then look at the yellow calendar. It's okay within a month. A month? Blue Mother opened her mouth. I'm afraid it won't work. It will take 3 months in a hurry. Lan Yu's fingers stroked Qin Chen's abdomen. What if there is? Blue Mother was stunned again. Yes? Qin Chen slapped his hand away. Don't talk nonsense. There's no such thing. Lan Yu leaned over and whispered, There's no need to take measures from tonight. There will be soon. Do you think you can wait for 3 months? Qin Chen gave him a white look, and then felt a little uncomfortable. Is she here now to discuss marriage with them? She doesn't seem to have agreed to marry him yet. Lan Yu smiled and held her hand. Don't go back on your word. Chen, I want to get married. Qin Chen bit his lip. Blue Mother coughed softly. I'll go to the bathroom. Tell me when you think about it. Then she said discontentedly, Young people nowadays don't discuss such a big thing as marriage with their parents. Blue Mother's tone is quite lost. The Blue family hasn't had a happy event for a long time. She hopes to have a lively scene. She doesn't want to aggrieve her son or Qin Chen. Besides, wouldn't it take a few months for the hair to grow out? If the son married a man at the wedding, would the scene still look good? Mother Lan thought about it and was worried. so she turned around and asked, Chen Chen, are you going to wear a wedding dress? Just as she asked, she saw her son and the girl kissing. Blue Mother's old face is red. These damn children really can't wait a moment longer. Blue Mother still left quietly, went back to discuss with her wife about the marriage, and also wanted to go to the Qin family to propose marriage another day. Both sides were respectable families, so they couldn't be careless about this matter. Otherwise, people would say that the Lan family didn't understand etiquette. Blue Mother left and was found half an hour later. Qin Chun left Lan Yu's lips and said in a low voice, Did your mom eat something bad? She hasn't come out yet. Lan Yu held her face and continued to kiss her as he murmured, Then we'll discuss it after she comes out of the bathroom. Before that, don't talk and let me kiss you properly. Qin Chun is speechless. Isn't he tired of kissing? Turns out that men are never tired of doing these things. As a result, after kissing for 2 hours, he found that his mother had left, and he carried her back upstairs directly. When everything calmed down, Qin Chun lay in his sweaty arms and poked his heart. I think we should move to live with your parents after we get married. Otherwise, I'll die of exhaustion if this continues for a long time. Chapter 2870. Qin Chun chuckled and didn't say anything. She just rested in his arms. Everything had become so beautiful. She became more and more beautiful day by day, as if she was a different person. Qin Chun didn't go to work at the hospital anymore. She focused on learning how to arrange flowers and how to make tea at home because she had promised Lan Yu that she would quit drinking coffee. He was so overbearing. He told her to open a cafe but didn't allow her to drink coffee at the same time. But thinking about it, she seemed to be drinking less recently. She often boiled coffee and threw it away. Qin Chun put a rose in the vase and stuck out his tongue. Fortunately, his family was rich enough to be able to afford to lose. She had a lot of shares in King Entertainment and didn't have to worry about her life. But Lan Yu gave her a black gold card for her daily expenses. He said that he was supporting her and that she could spend it however she wanted. Qin Chun had seen it before. The amount was enough to open 50 high-end cafes. She was flattered but accepted it calmly. She had to serve Mr. Lan happily at night. This kind of life was very slow. She woke up naturally in the morning and had breakfast ready. He had left at 8, but he waited until she woke up to give her a good morning kiss and eat breakfast with her before going to work. Of course, she also knew that he went jogging early in the morning. Thinking of this, Qin Chen's face turned slightly red. He was a man who didn't sleep for more than a few hours a night and exercised the entire night. How could he have the strength to jog early in the morning after exhausting so much energy? Although she had doubts, she didn't dare to ask. She would only be asking for trouble. Qin Chen smiled and remembered that they had an appointment to take wedding photos at 5 o'clock today. Recently, he had been quite busy, so he only took indoor photos. As for the outdoor photos, he would take them for her during their honeymoon. Qin Chun tidied up the vase and let out a long sigh. She liked her current life. It had only been a few days, and she had even forgotten that she was a doctor. She smelled the roses. The fragrance of flowers smelled good, much better than the smell of disinfectant in the hospital. Just as she was about to make some simple dishes, her phone rang. She picked it up. Lan Yu? The person on the other side was silent for a long time. Qin Chen was a little surprised. He looked at the caller ID. It was an unknown number. Just as she was about to hang up, a voice came from the other side. Chunchen, it's me. Qin Chen's heart sank. Naturally, she would not forget this voice. It was Rong Lei. She silently calculated in her heart. Today was the last day that Rong Lei would stay in B City. He had to leave tomorrow. Thinking of this, she relaxed slightly. What's the matter? Rong Lei's voice was gentle. Chunchen, I want to see you one last time. Qin Chun was silent for a while before he sighed. Rong Lei, there's no need for that, is there? Did you not see me for the last time? Rong Lei's voice was low and hoarse. Chunchen, you must hate me very much. No. Qin Chun thought for a moment and said, Rong Lei, it's just that so much time has passed. We are no longer the same as before. Rong Lei smiled very softly. I've always been like this. Chanchin, you know very well that it's only you who has changed. His voice was slow. It's just that you fell in love with someone else. That's all. Chin Chun was a little sad. She did not want to become such a hostile relationship with Rong Lei, but it seemed that he had gone to the extreme. In the end, they still became strangers. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.